I struggled with preaching on this passage this morning because it is so beautiful. It has to be one of the most sensually rich passages, I think, in the entire gospel. I hope I still have my, oh, there it is. Too many things in this pocket. I almost lost my prop. So I brought a little mini sensory experience today. I would have had to probably been smoking the church with incense from 5 a.m. to get it to really, the smell to fill the house like Mary's perfume did. It's not quite a pound, but it is a little bit of spikenard, oil of spikenard. So I'm going to pass this around, and I encourage you to take a good whiff and then pass it on. If a little bit winds up on your wrist, that's okay too. Spikenard is an oil of a flower that only grows in the Himalaya mountains. So this nard, this pound of pure nard, would have been a costly imported good in first century Jerusalem. And I love the image of Mary. I love so much about her offering of love. And I particularly love it in John's gospel this morning. This story is actually told of Jesus' anointing by a woman in all 4 of the gospels. But only in John's gospel is it Mary, his close friend. And some people think Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene might have got confused. But in any case, it's one of Jesus' closest disciples who does this incredibly intimate act for him. And so I got to thinking about this experience that they shared, this moment of union and of love, and I got to thinking about my own life and experiences, and I wonder if you have ever been given a gift that was so precious to you and totally unexpected. Somebody did something for you that just blew your mind to the extent that you even might have thought, how am I worthy to receive such a gift? I actually had an experience like that last week, and if you asked me about it during coffee hour, I'd love to tell you. It doesn't fit in the sermon. Or I wonder if you've ever had a sign, it might have been like a sign from God or a particular blessing, particular sweetness, just before something hard was about to happen. I know for absolutely no reason, someone who I actually don't even know that well came to my front door and gave me a little vase of unopened buds of flowers the night before I had my accident, actually. And I was able to watch that little bouquet kind of open over the coming weeks as I entered into my healing. Or I wonder if you actually have ever been moved by some kind of intuition to do something for somebody that really didn't make a lot of sense, but wound up being something that meant an incredible amount to that person, that was really significant. Hopefully you've had one or the other of these experiences, because I think it can help us relate to what's happening between Mary and Jesus in this moment. But it's clear that it's unexpected. It's clear that it's outside of the norms and the boundaries, right? Because Judas can't be the only one objecting. In fact, in the other Gospels, it's kind of all of the disciples that are like, what's going on here? This is a huge waste. The amount of the 300 denarii that this nard was supposedly worth would have been a year's wages, right? A year's wages that Mary pours onto Jesus's feet. And she doesn't just sort of dab a little bit, enough to give him a foot massage, right? She pours on so much excess that she has to take her hair and wipe up the excess, right? This is an act of extravagant, abundant, scandalous, superfluous, profligate love that Mary offers Jesus. And we don't have to stop at the economic here, right? Because even from a distance of 2,000 years and a totally different cultural context, this lesson makes us a little uncomfortable, right? There's something so intimate and sensual and almost like it should be happening behind closed doors in their encounter. And you have to think in first century Jerusalem, when men and women did not touch each other, when women didn't let down their hair except in private behind closed doors with their husbands. This is a shocking, scandalous act. I mean, it's so scandalous that nobody even mentions it, except several of the gospel writers attribute the act to sort of a woman of loose morals, right? And this kind of comes down to us throughout the ages and gets attached to Mary Magdalene superfluously. It's so scandalous. It's so outside of the bounds. It's so over the top, this act of love, this outrageous act of love that Mary shows to Jesus. So I got to thinking, where have we seen that kind of profligate, over the top, superfluous, abundant, extravagant love before? And I just looked one Sunday back to the story of the prodigal son and the father's welcome of that beloved child home. When he wanted to be the servant and he was welcomed with his father's own robe and ring and the killing of the fatted calf. Or I thought back to Jesus' first miracle in John at the wedding of Cana in Galilee. Jesus didn't just make a little bit of wine, enough to kind of get them through, right? Jesus made, I think it was something like 512 bottles of wine, right? I think they had enough. I think they had extra, and not just kind of run-of-the-mill wine. Jesus made the best wine they had ever tasted. Or I think about the feeding of the 5,000 with the 2 fish and the 5 loaves. It's a little overlooked detail, but it's in most of the Gospels, and I think it's really important. There were actually leftovers from that meal. Like 7 baskets, and another count, 12 baskets full of leftover fish and leftover bread. Jesus says, go and collect the leftovers. Why? Because Jesus is making a point that God's love overflows. God's love is super abundant. God's love doesn't count the cost. God's love appears wasteful. In 2 weeks, we'll be at Palm Sunday and entering into Holy Week. Oh, 1 week for Palm Sunday, thank you. Somebody's keeping the calendar. 2 weeks will be at Easter. Whoa, Amy, get with the program. 1 week will be at Palm Sunday. Next Sunday, we'll be entering into Holy Week, and we'll stand at the foot of the cross. And if that doesn't look like a waste, right? A waste of a life, a waste of a love, a waste of an incarnation, I don't know what does. But God brings life out of that kind of wasteful love. God brings joy. And Mary gets it. Mary understands something here and is sharing something here with Jesus that I honestly believe got him through that week, right? That's why I asked if you'd ever had that experience of something especially wonderful, a blessing coming to you before a difficult experience. I think that's what this was for Jesus. Not only that, Jesus follows Mary's example of a tangible sign of incarnate love. He then goes and offers that same sign of love to his disciples on what we call Maundy Thursday, when he washes each of their feet and wipes them and gives them bread and wine and says, I'm giving you all of myself. This is all of me that I'm giving to you. Mary had given herself, all of herself, to Jesus not a week before. And imagine Mary being able to minister to God in that moment, being able to strengthen Jesus for what was ahead of him. And I think somehow in that sharing of mutual love, in that we might call it, the mystics would call it a mystical union of love that Mary and Jesus are experiencing in that moment, they're also experiencing, in the face of death, resurrection. I'm not sure quite how that works, but I have a sense that they've kind of anticipated the resurrection, that they're having this moment of joy and of union that transcends everything that's about to happen. And Judas just can't go there. Right? Judas is somehow shut out of this experience that Mary and Jesus are sharing, this union. He's stuck on a different plane. If you can ignore the Judas bashing, right? We don't have to go into that, well, he was a thief and he was about to betray Jesus. You don't even have to go there. Just go with what he says, right? Assuming that what he says is the level that he's at, right? Well, this should have been sold and the money given to the poor, and he's at a very concrete transactional level where the exchange is what matters, right? The obligation is what matters. The letter of the law is what matters, and not the gift of extravagant, profligate love. He can't understand that, right? And Paul is a beautiful reading to read today from Philippians. Paul's in prison in Rome when he writes that letter. He's facing the end of his own life, his own crucifixion. And he's telling his very personal testimony. You know, he says, I was all that by the world's standards. You know, by my faith standards, my religion standards, I had every single box checked of the law, right? And it doesn't have to be a kind of a Jewish context. A Roman convert could have said, you know, I had all of that. I was at the top of my game, right? And Paul says he regards all of that as loss, not just loss, but rubbish, right? He doesn't say, you know, I have this to fall back on if this Jesus thing doesn't work out. He's put all of his eggs into this basket. The thing that matters to him is being claimed by Christ, belonging to Jesus. That relationship is what matters. And so he shows us the struggle. He shows us the work. He says, I'm not there yet. Thank you, Paul, right? Thank you. We can say thank you to Paul this morning. None of us are there yet, right? It can be easy looking at something like this precious moment between Mary and Jesus to also feel shut out. But Paul says it's a struggle every single day to leave that behind and to strain on towards what's ahead. Because you see, Paul knows that the life in Jesus, belonging to Jesus, being claimed by Jesus, doesn't preclude suffering and death. He knows that that's what's out ahead of him. But he pushes forward because he knows that somehow his being willing to submit to that death and his being claimed fully by Christ in Christ's resurrection are bound up together. And so he moves forward in faith and in trust, with nothing but empty hands, waiting for God to fill them. A couple of weeks ago, when I preached, I talked about how we might live out an economy of love, an abundance of love in our daily lives, instead of kind of an economy of rules and obligations. And I talked about building what I call micro bridges instead of micro walls when we're out in public, just trying to connect with people. I talked about recognizing our common humanity instead of reinforcing divisions and all the different ways that we do that. I talked about putting down our anchor into what it is that matters most to us, putting down our spiritual anchor, putting down our roots into the fertilized soil. We were talking about the fig tree and the manure around it at that point. And I think that's what today's gospel is inviting us deeply to do. Deeply to do. And that's not just to, fulfill our obligations. This is a really particular point in our Lenten journey, right? We can sort of smell the barn. We can see the end of the journey here. Two more weeks left until Easter. And whether you've, not even got around to having a Lenten practice, or you've sort of fallen away from your Lenten practice, or maybe you're just right on the ball and that's great for you. But I think that most of us probably at this point have found that what we set ourselves out to do was a little more difficult than we originally imagined. And I think that's kind of the point of Lenten practices, is to throw us back into God's love, into God's embrace, into depending on God for what it is that we need. And so you're just at the perfect point. I want to encourage you, if you're not all up on your Lenten practice, you're at the perfect point in Lent to acknowledge that need, to acknowledge that gift, and to return that gift to God. In a couple moments, we're going to enter into our 3 minutes of silent meditation that we've been doing for the season of Lent. And I want to encourage you to place yourself at Jesus' feet for this time and offer what it is that is in your heart to offer. Right? It might be that your heart isn't full of love and gratitude right now. That's okay. That's all right. It might be that your heart is full of doubts or questions or struggles. Whatever it is, we can pour it out. We can pour it out on Jesus' feet. And if we stand there then with our hands open and our hearts open, I know that that love will come back to us.